Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's Insight Forum live webinar. My name is Danting, and I am from the Public Policy Institute of Our Hong Kong Foundation and will be your MC today. On behalf of Our Hong Kong Foundation, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to members of OHKF, friends from the media, and members of the public joining us now. Today, we are honored to have Dr. Victor Fung, Group Chairman of the Fung Group. Dr. Fung will share with us his thoughts on global supply chain normalization, trade regionalism, and implications for Hong Kong. Mr. Stephen Wong, Deputy Executive Director and Head of the Public Policy Institute of OHKF, will moderate this session. Dr. Fung, Stephen, I hand the time over to you.
Thanks, Danting. Thanks so much, Dr. Fung, for joining us.
Morning, Stephen.
Good morning.
It's great to be among friends and colleagues.
Great, thank you. We're going to have a chat on the important topics. A lot of things have changes in COVID, a lot of opportunities and challenges, and maybe we're going to chat about this for 40 minutes or so, and then we're going to invite two famous renowned professors to join us in our conversation, Professor Richard Wong and Professor Francis Lui later. And then we also would invite questions and answers from the audiences. But first, post-pandemic, while looking forward, or during this pandemic, we don't know how long it will last. How is the global supply chain changing, and what do you see as the new normal in your industry?
Oh, wow, this is a big question.
Yes.
I think the global supply chains are really, as a result of this crisis, but maybe even before then, has undergone really radical change. Let me mention two factors that are even before the COVID. First, I think there's a whole trend of digitalization. In my mind, that has been going on for at least 15 years in the world.
Right.
And the supply chain, starting from the part that is closest to the consumer, as we all know, is being increasingly digitized, and then now moving upstream, so that the whole supply chain from end to end is now being completely digitized. Now, what that really brings about is a radical change, quite apart from anything else in itself, because of the way technology is being used, because of the way the consumer is acting today. The whole thing has already, undergo a major change.
Can you give a bit example? Are you talking about sort of online sampling, people using virtual reality to look at the factories
you can
and that sort of things?
Use all those technologies, of course, but the fundamental proposition is very simple. This machine here has now enabled the consumer, and the consumer is now driving the supply chain from the consumer end. It's a consumer pull. It used to be that the people with the ideas and the designs and the brands would be pushing the supply chain.
I see.
From the idea down. Now it's being pulled. So the real changes that we're seeing in the supply chain is a complete emphasis on, first of all, speed.
Okay.
Because as you know, you buy something on the web or anywhere, you want it within 24, 48 hours.
Right.
The clock speed has completely changed, and it's able to change because of technology. The second is the whole idea of actually now being able to actually now individualize what the consumer needs, into large number of very small market niches. Means that the whole supply chain needs to adjust to very small minimum order quantities.
Okay.
Like 100 pieces per style instead of 100,000 pieces of style. So this is a radical change. Now, the second thing is a little more recent, but we're all very familiar with it, which is the trade tensions around the world. Especially the US-China trade tension, which originated about 3 years ago.
Yep.
And that has also radically changed the supply chain. It has really, moved a lot of different, shall we say, places where people want to actually finish the final stage of the product. And I think, and that actually has been in train. And of course, if you're actually doing everything in China, for example, and it's made in China, country of origin, then when you go to the United States, They have imposed very high duties. So you may want to do all the stages except the last stage. Doing enough in another country, like Southeast Asia and Vietnam. So in fact, it becomes a Vietnam country of origin, and then you ship. So it's really completely redistributed the supply chain.
Right. Can I pick up on this, because I hear mixed studies on the relocation of this production. Some people say that there's, significant production, let's say to Vietnam or even Malaysia, but some people would say that, hey, this is, the relocation is less than what people have expected. Can you? Okay,
I can certainly do that. Let me complete the final point, which is with the COVID.
Right. Yep.
I think everything has been accelerated. And really, the whole global economy, as you know, has been under a lot of pressure. Although I'm seeing now a little light at the end of the tunnel. Now, so to answer your question now, it's actually moved in stages. Because when the trade war first came in, we saw the geographic spread, right? And then and especially when China had the initial issue in the first quarter with COVID.
Right.
However, when China completely controlled the COVID, and the COVID also moved to Southeast Asia, you know what? Things began moving back to China. Because they couldn't.
Right.
Yeah. And even in the first stage, China was actually still continuing with the exports because the components were still coming from China. So really, now because Southeast Asia is now recovering also and controlling COVID, it's becoming a little more normal situation, except the demand has now changed, right?
Right.
Originally, the demand was holding up in both Europe and America. And now the demand has now fallen. So you got to now go into really where's the new demand, and that, of course, is Asia. So really the conclusion there, Stephen, is it's not whether it's going to be here or move in one direction and that's it. I think what we really need to emphasize is the flexibility, the so-called agility in the supply chain, and the ability to move with the moving environment. Yeah, and then being able to be very robust or very resilient, so it doesn't break even when there are shocks.
So in order to increase the flexibility and robustness and resilience, and some people coin this term China plus one, to diversify the production pace. Is it happening, or is it just a
the
fancy
Japanese,
term?
especially our Japanese business friends, have coined this term, I think, for more than a decade now.
Okay.
And this has been happening. And I think now we have to say it's not only China plus one, it's China plus many. People not say, that's not the real issue. The whole issue is flexibility. And in fact, the so-called China plus one policy, if you really think about it, was also China's national policy for at least a decade. Remember, during the period when Mr. Wang Yang was the governor of the party secretary of Guangdong, he had the whole concept of Tang Long Wen Liu, changing the bird in the cage,
right.
Which is basically, in a sense, really downloading the final, more labor-intensive stage of the production process, and then for China to actually move up the value chain and do the components and the upstream, which is much more technologically driven, much more high value added. And that actually has been ongoing Chinese government policy. And now it's in a sense, being completed because of what's happened in the last few years.
Is it also aligned with what you sort of told me before, that this is changing from the made in China to managed by China?
Okay, now you're talking about another concept. Yes, absolutely. China used to be the factory of the world, and everything then moved to being made in China. Now I think everything is not necessarily finished in China, but China has a very big influence on the total supply chain. And in fact, that is very much the Hong Kong story.
Right.
Remember at the time of the reunification, we had a movement from made in Hong Kong to made by Hong Kong. What that really means is that the supply chains are now being radically outsourced. It's not necessarily just finished in China, not made in China, but China is supplying the components, China is supplying the concepts, the designs, perhaps later on even the brands, and it's also supplying the entrepreneurs, many of which are SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, that would actually execute. So the whole concept is not necessarily a product that is completely done in China, but it's by China and using China component, using China expertise on a regional basis or global basis. So made by China.
Made by China. And is it also, in this new normal of trade tariffs and managed by China, made by China, does it also mean that, and because of the consumer market in China you mentioned, can you also talk a little bit about this concept of the reshoring and nearshoring of productions?
Yes. Well, this is something that frankly has born out of the concerns about the epidemic and the use of the medical-related equipment and so on, what people call a PPE. In fact, the idea that when you look at the range of products, some products are important enough to be kept domestically and done only in the country. A very extreme example, of course, anything to do with technology, to do with the defense. Obviously, you want to control that within your own national boundaries.
Right.
So this is not a new concept. What is now happening is because of the pandemic, the people are saying maybe more needs to be kept and maybe needs to pull back, to be reshored, to be now national production. So really what's happening to the world today, in my mind, is you look at all the products, there's probably two categories. One category is what I would call essential products. Though those are like the defense and the medical, the PPE, and maybe even some aspects of food safety that you want to at least keep those. Those could be definitely reshored and would be nationally controlled. However, there's going to be a whole slew of non-essential products. Things that everyday life, your shirt, your shoes, etc. It does not make sense for shoes to be made in Wisconsin, right? My own view is, if there's some reshoring of essential products, which is inevitable, the non-essential products will in fact be even more globalized. And in fact, you would want to take advantage of the globalization of those products in order to reduce the cost of those, to balance the cost of reshoring some of the essential products. So that's how the world is now moving. So the concern at one point that everything will be reshored is totally unfounded. Now, of course, behind all this is also the issue of jobs, of course. And that is also another factor. But that factor doesn't drive this whole reshoring.
Interesting.
And what you may also see is a concept called nearshoring, which is to produce, if a major market is in the United States, a nearshoring market may be Mexico or the Caribbean, where you can actually finish the products near the major market. So it could fly or be transported into the major markets very quickly. And that, frankly, is much more in response to consumer demand. Again, the idea that I said earlier about clock speed and the consumer wanting instant gratification. If I order something, it better be delivered in the next 24 hours. So the nearshoring concept is probably what's going to be the norm in the future.
That's very interesting. Can we also talk about business? So given this digital technological advance that you guys have been working on for many years already, but would that sort of bring about more further disintermediation, and how can one sort of work with this changing technological advancement in the digital supply chain that you guys have been looking at for a long time?
Well, I think digitalization is going to be inevitable. And I think really the question is how you adapt it to the new environment. And the most important thing that I can think of is what I said about the behavior of the consumer, that the supply chains are being much more consumer pull, market pull, rather than product push. And really, as you know, if you look at the whole supply chain from the idea of a product to actually the consumer, the downstream is almost completely digitalized.
Right.
You know, I always carry a blue pen, and I always use this as demonstration.
Okay.
See, if you look at from idea to consumer, somewhere in this long chain, the product actually appears. The idea of a blue pen, the blue pen appears. And then now if you look at the blue pen to the consumer, that's almost completely digitized. You know, Alibaba, you know, JD, Amazon, etc.
Right.
However, if you think about the whole concept of if you have an idea, you know, and then creating the product, the upstream portion of the supply chain, that actually is still very analog.
Oh.
You see? And only pieces of it is digitized. So what we've been concentrating on is now the digitalization of the upstream part. Now, if you do that part, and then you have an open interface, you can actually hook up with any one of a number of downstream digitized, and then you have end-to-end.
Right.
And I think that's really going to be the way we would harness the technology to work for us. And I think, you know, and the many technologies that is now being absorbed. You know, for example, you know, at Li & Fung, we're now the whole design process, which is the part that takes the longest time in the whole end-to-end chain, from idea to consumer. It takes the bulk of the time because of the design. You want to make samples, see if it's the right design. That is now completely digitized. But we're using about 30 technologies put together in a platform to actually make that digitalization. And now you can actually design a product within 24 hours. And used to be weeks or months. You know, so this is really what's happening, and you're responding to the global environment.
Interesting. Some people said that the COVID accelerate this digitization of the upstream that you mentioned because people don't want to see each other. but in terms of the design and sampling, some people argue though, you know, it's hard to do it online because you have to feel the texture of the garment and that sort of things before you.
That is exactly, that is the advance of technology. The use of AI, for example. You know, what is very hard to do is when you have an object and you can actually even, let's say you're designing a shoe, you can even rotate it with different light. However, if you're wearing a dress, if you're looking at a dress, the dress has to drape. And when you walk, it has to move, right? Doing that part of the digitalization is the hardest. It's actually at the cutting edge of AI. So the thing I want to emphasize is when you improve the global supply chain like this, it means that there's a lot of new jobs that are created along the supply chains. So the whole supply chain idea is not just the whole idea of just manufacturing and sewing. You know, when you think about how you've digitized the design process, you know it creates a huge number of jobs just on different aspects of using and integrating a technology.
That is interesting.
Yeah, and that really says, you know, if the digitization may replace jobs, yes, I'm sure it'll be different jobs, but you're actually creating perhaps even more jobs than you lose.
Yeah, I want to talk more about Hong Kong later, but at this point it's important because you know, to be a good sourcing hub in you know, Hong Kong to continue its role, you know, people didn't realize that we need to actually invest into R&D and technology that actually play a role in that, because usually we think about technology in other manufacturing aspect, but what you're talking about, it's even in the design and all this AI will utilize a lot of technology.
I think that's where most of it is actually used. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, at least a lot of it. It's a huge part of the whole process.
Another role,
and that's where we excel in Hong Kong, by the way.
Yes, that's great. Another thing that Hong Kong plays is obviously finance, and you mentioned trade finance is one of the key area that we have to deal with. Can you address this problem of what's going on in trade finance?
Yeah. Let me again, perhaps Stephen, put that in perspective. What we're really now seeing in terms of global trade today is, I think we're seeing light at the end of the tunnel for potential revival. Okay. In fact, I think the key to the revival of the global economy is first of all, the revival of trade. I think trade is what's going to lead the revival of the global economy.
Okay.
First point I want to mention is the importance of trade and making that the centerpiece, the centrality of trade. Because that actually helps, the supply chains that are producing goods both for domestic consumption and for export are the things that actually get the economy going. Okay? Now, trade in the first quarter, I mean, people were afraid that the trade could drop, 10, 20, 30%, which was never happened. But still, it's less than last year. It's not even, I think it'll drop about maybe between 9 and 10%.
Okay.
Okay, but it's recovering. We're seeing light at the end of the tunnel. The point I want to make is, if we want to sustain this recovery, it is very important at this stage now to put a very important ingredient. Now we're running up against the constraint of maybe that demand, maybe people can produce. However, we cannot facilitate the trade because there's a shortage of trade finance.
Okay.
Now, if that doesn't come, the whole thing may peter off. So that is, I don't want to put that in perspective. We saw that actually in the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. The world almost came to a standstill, not because of lack of demand back then, not because of lack of supply, but because of lack of trade finance. And for a number of reasons, the banks were under pressure. In fact, the rules in Basel III had a very punitive amount of allocation of capital against trade receivables and things like that. Anyway, a lot of issues. But the world actually, the G20 at that time, remember there was a meeting in London of the G20, actually did a concerted action among all the governments in the world to actually increase the amount of export credit insurance in the world and completely lifted the world out of this danger.
Right.
Now, and one country doing it is not enough. It's almost like a concert. That's why multilateralism is so important. It has to be a concerted effort. So fast forward to today, same problem, slightly different. There's plenty of liquidity in the banks, frankly, because people have been printing so much money.
Right.
Plenty of liquidity. The problem is the banks are reluctant to lend, especially to SMEs, because of credit issues.
Right.
So it's still the amount of trade finance available to where it counts, which is really primarily the SMEs, okay, is still not happening. And we really need to do a lot of concerted effort. And really the world, I've been very much associated with the International Chamber of Commerce. They have formed a global group to try and really talk to the governments, the G20 and the multilaterals, like WTO and World Bank, to actually do a coordinated effort. I think we may need, for example, to do another major effort to get all the export credit insurers, like Hong Kong's ECIC, which, by the way, stepped up dramatically during the last crisis, to continue now, and they're doing it. But it's not just, it's like Coface in France, Euler Hermes, et cetera, and Sinosure in China, et cetera. So we're now on the verge of a recovery. It has to be nurtured, and we need to have trade finances playing a very important role.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah.
Because as you said previously, it was a liquidity issue, and therefore, the export credit, they step up to solve more of a liquidity issue. And now we are dealing with credit issue.
Well,
that is,
it was both.
It was both.
Yeah.
But now credit issues really stem from the fact that people are concerned about the contracting demands, overseas in the U.S. or in Europe, and people don't see it, don't see the light at the tunnel as well. So how do we solve that demand contraction and therefore have credit losses and that sort of thing?
It's not, the demand is being sustained quite well.
Okay, even in
but
the US.
It could be disrupted very quickly because of lockdown. You see?
Yeah.
So if I'm a lender and I'm looking at the SME, how do I know that the order that you're doing now doesn't get canceled?
Right.
Or when you ship the order, all of a sudden the buyer, the retailer that's bought the order, which I discounted that receivable, all of a sudden go out of business.
Right.
So that is the uncertainty. But the fundamental demand, believe it or not, actually, global trade is actually recovering.
Right.
And by the way, if you dig a little deeper, a lot of it is because of trade in PPE. It's a big component now.
Right.
But I have to say that the demand for basic products are still there.
Right.
People still need to eat. They still need to, and they're buying things on the web.
Right.
The e-commerce sales in America, for example, has gone over 30% of retail sales, and I think it will be sustained there.
Would you therefore
even in this pandemic?
Right. So would you therefore argue that even there are disruptions and therefore resulted in some credit losses, some of these retailers might go into bankruptcies, whatever. There might be some credit loss. The global government still need to step up and do this.
Yeah. Now let me go one step further, maybe making a slightly more controversial thought. You see, we are in a position now where we may need to actually help the real economy with fiscal measures to support, right? And in particular the SMEs. So the question is how you spend that money. Now, what I'm arguing is if you spend that money in the form of actually giving export credit guarantees or other things, you may in fact sustain a pretty large credit loss.
Right.
However, I think that's a better way to spend the money than direct subsidies.
Yeah.
Because you know why? There's a huge multiply effect.
Right.
Once you get the supply chain going, there may be 40 people in the supply chain. And there's a multiplier effect. So you are going to spend money anyway. You need a fiscal response to help the economy. It's how you spend it. Do you want to spend it direct or you spend it this way? Which gives you the multiplier effect.
That is very interesting.
Yeah, and so I'm not arguing that there's one way to get around the credit losses. But over the long term, I think there is, because then big data plays. Then you can actually gather enough information about the performance of even individual SMEs over time, maybe 3 years, 5 years. The big data will come in, and then you may be able to make better credit judgments, based on the performance of individual units in the system, like individual SMEs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can we shift our topic into this new strategy called dual circulation strategy that is mentioned in the 14th five-year plan in mainland China? And so what are the vision and sort of what does that mean for GBA or Hong Kong in your view?
Oh,
it's a big topic.
You want the 2-minute version or the 2-hour version?
2-minute version.
Yeah. Okay, I think it's going to be the 2-minute version. Now, frankly, this is going to be the key, I think, for the next stage of China's development. I have no doubt that this will be the core of the 14th five-year plan, which will be, which is now being discussed. We're all looking to provide input, and also it will be promulgated during the Lang in March of next year. I think what it really gets to is the heart of the balance between the domestic economy and the global economy. First of all, it is not what some of the international media might have said. This is a complete orientation to a closed domestic economy. It absolutely is still the linkage. Maybe what's happening is the emphasis. Yeah. Maybe it was very big emphasis on the external economy in the past, but now we want to actually have a little more balance. But the linkage definitely has to be there.
Right.
And let me bring this home to something that is very close to business's heart and close to Hong Kong business heart. In fact, that will illustrate where this could actually be implemented and where Hong Kong can make a real difference in this dual circulation. You remember, again, about 10 years ago, you have the China's manufacturing sector, the complete manufacturing, was actually split into two worlds. One world actually are in the economic zones that manufacture only for export. Another world is factories doing domestic manufacturing. It's actually very, very funny. 河水不犯井水. You know, it's true. And you can't sell into the other. Now, there was a big push by especially businesses in Hong Kong, you know, because we have a lot of products that we manufacture for export. We want to sell domestic.
Yeah.
This is 10 years ago now. Now, and there was a lot of lobbying to actually allow us to do that. Now, the difficulty back then was, in fact, the argument goes like this. The people in the export zones that doing export have imported machinery and raw material without duty.
Right.
If you open it up, it's unfair competition, right? Now, that has, by and large, you know, now not really the issue. And now, if you actually put the two together, there are actually huge advantages now for the Chinese economy.
Yeah.
I'll just cite two. First, if we want to stimulate domestic consumption, okay, there are a lot of products that are being manufactured only for export that the Chinese consumer get very, very low access to.
Right.
Okay, sometimes, you know, it goes exported to France and then re-imported.
Or come to Hong Kong to
Yeah,
buy.
I tell you a joke that we had even in the old days. It's called 香港一日遊. One day excursion trip to Hong Kong.
Yep.
That's in our Toys R Us operation. There's a lot of toys manufactured in China, of course, especially in the PRD.
Yep.
But because we couldn't sell in our stores in Toys R Us in China, so we export the product to Hong Kong.
Okay.
Turn around one day, you re-import it. That's how you have to do it.
Right.
Now, it kind of worked, except it added 15% to our cost.
Right.
You see the issue?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, if you combine the two, all these products that are now exclusively for export are now available. So there's a lot of stuff, frankly, 價廉物美, available to the Chinese consumer. I think that will be another round of stimulation for the domestic Chinese consumer.
Lower cost.
And it will allow a lot of Hong Kong businesses that have export factories to create that new market that we've always been talking about on Chinese domestic consumption.
Right.
Now, the second point, which is very important, I think, from a Chinese overall exports concern, is the whole issue of economy of scale. If you look at the successful, you know, trading powers in the world, like Japan and Germany, the history has always been creating a domestic market and then leveraging that domestic market onto the global arena. You know, and it's always like that. China actually created an external market with no reference to the domestic, if you think about it. And the domestic also came up.
Right.
Now, if you join the two, I think it's going to be really a very big advantage. The economy of scale, I think, of joining domestic demand and global demand, I think will be tremendous. So it would actually make Chinese exports even more competitive globally.
Right.
And really opening up that and also be able to use the products to stimulate domestic demand. And I think in the midst of all this, I think if you think of that as, I think to me, the core thing that needs to be tackled in the intersection between the domestic circulation and international circulation, it's this. Now we have a name for it. It's 內外貿一體化.
Okay.
You know, it's really the two sectors of the manufacturing put into one.
Right.
And why do you distinguish between factories that sell domestically and the ones that sell internationally? So that's yeah. Now the final point I would say, then I think the place that the dual circulation will be implemented will be in the Greater Bay Area as the most important initial trial point. And that opens up a huge opportunity for Hong Kong and Hong Kong businesses. All our SMEs that have factories just across the border, making this shift into, you know, when they combine and open up. You know, I think that's really, I think, where we can actually play a major role, and would be a great opportunity to develop for ourselves.
Can I just clarify that? So this is obviously something that should be done, but are you saying that you are seeing this probably will be done? As
You're asking sensitive questions. I think it's certainly been considered.
Right.
I think it has to be a series of discussions. And you know where the barriers are today, and I'll be, if you're interested, it's to do with standards.
I see.
It's no longer the tax has been equalized substantially because of the VAT and et cetera. It's in the issue of standards. Because when you manufacture a cup for export, you're satisfying overseas standards, US standards, European standards. China has its own standards. GB, 国标.
Right.
Yeah, 国标 standards. So now I'm not saying which is more tougher, they're just different. Maybe they test 10 things and they test 10 things, maybe 5 overlap and 5 are different. You see, it's the issue of the need to harmonization of standards.
Wow.
So that if I can actually manufacture something that satisfies the safety and so on of these countries, is accepted and vice versa. Yeah, I'm sure any country will ask for reciprocity. So it goes again to the background of the need for a multilateral world, where you can actually get people to think about harmonization of standards.
Okay.
So what's preventing an immediate merging of the export manufacturing sector and the domestic manufacturing sector, I think now is the issue of standards.
That's very interesting. And you talk about the multilateral sort of structure, and we got to go into this next area of topic is RCEP. RCEP obviously is a big topic again.
Another favorite topic of mine.
Exactly. Another huge topic. To see, what do you see Hong Kong? How do we sort of, we are not part of it. Yeah, China, obviously China is, and we're trying to get a membership. But what does it mean to Hong Kong, now that RCEP is, forming?
Okay. Yeah.
Another 2 hours.
Maybe 2 hours.
2 hours.
Okay. Let me just put it in perspective. I think RCEP is the largest free trade agreement that has been negotiated in the world. And we have just completed it. I think it is perhaps the most important thing that's happened to the world in global trade since the conclusion of the Uruguay round.
Wow.
Now, so I want to tell you how significant it is in the global trading field. Now, we all know what RCEP is. It's the 10 countries of ASEAN plus China, Japan, Korea, and then Australia, New Zealand. 10 plus 5. Now, it's a third of the world's population, just under about 30%, and then a third of the world's GDP. And it's really, a significant part of the world, about the same percentage of the world trade. Now, what is really significant about RCEP is coming especially at this time in the global environment, where the global system is pretty much under complete pressure, right? The WTO is really now struggling to even function. I think we need a reconstruction of the new multilateral trading system. I think the RCEP is going to be the core that could help in the reconstruction of the entire global system.
Oh, wow.
Now, so that's the significance globally. Let's talk regional and for Hong Kong. I think RCEP is going to be a boon to regional trade, and especially giving focus to the big thing that you and I have talked about a lot, which is the rise of Asian consumption. As you know, Asia 20 years ago accounted for maybe a third of the global consumption. All the forecasts is 20 years from now, 2040, Asia will be more than 50% of global consumption.
Wow.
This will be the largest consumer market in the world. In fact, McKinsey forecasts that there will be 3 billion middle-class consumers in Asia by 2030, in fact, in a very short period of time. So this is huge. And what RCEP really does is to put together a free trade area. And if you think about it, it is the only trading region that has both the production capacity and the demand in one place.
I see.
And really, it's going to facilitate dramatically the movement of intra-regional trade, intra-regional and investment. Whenever you can trade, is always investment. Trade and investment is two sides of the same coin. You don't talk about trade without investment and investment without trade.
Okay.
I'm talking about FDI, of course, not financial.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be a boon to regional. And I think this, in my mind, without exception, will be the fastest growing economic region in the world. And China is at the center of it, driving a lot. Everybody is really now focused on where the demand is all here, production is here, etc. Now, that is not to say that we want to cut off. This whole idea is so powerful because it's built on the concept of open regionalism.
Okay.
And very, very inclusive. It is not a rich man's club in which we're members, and then if I don't like you, you cannot join.
Okay.
It's really open regionalism where the barriers to entry is very low.
I see.
Relatively low. Let's say relatively. I won't use the word very low. Relatively low. So that means the rich countries can be there easily, and then the developing economies can also join. In that sense, it's very inclusive. And it's also got major innovations for people, businesses like ourselves, because they are really making it very easy to define very practical things like country of origin. They're defining a new concept, let's call it made in RCEP.
I see.
Where you can ship back and forth with very low duty. And the barrier, the bar is very low. If you have 40% local content, meaning within anywhere in RCEP, it qualifies as an RCEP product. And you can ship anywhere within RCEP, with a very low duty. And that duty is scheduled to phase out over 20 years. So there'll be zero duty shipping these products within RCEP in 20 years.
Right.
Can you imagine the opportunity for people to, frankly, to have access to the big demands like China, for the other countries? And now this also, so it's actually an open regionalism. That's why I say it may form the core to actually now of really redoing the new multilateralism for the whole world.
Setting as an example, basically.
Yeah, and also expanding. And I can see that more and more members, and hopefully after this, India would be part of it, and then along the Belt and Road.
I see.
And then and then you see, and RCEP could actually increase, and then maybe do a deal with Europe, and then America, where things, maybe the way to now create a truly new multilateral system is to think in terms of regions. You do RCEP in Asia and make it very vibrant and very open regionalism. You've got the EU in Europe, and you got the USMCA, the United States, Canada, Mexico, the new NAFTA in the US. They all have their own internal circulation. I'll use this one. Yeah. And then you link it all together into a global whole.
Right.
So I think that may be the most practical way for us to move forward into a new multilateralism.
Some people say that there's a long way between RCEP to, let's say, the sort of economic integration like EU or,
Yeah, or even TPP.
Or even TPP.
Or the CPTPP, the new TPP.
Do you see that they are getting more integrated over time, or do you see that the membership would expand?
The membership, I would say, let's get more members in, get the mass, and then upgrade over time.
I see.
And I think the RCEP has a lot of things to say about intellectual property and things like that. So it's moving in that direction.
Right.
And then also trade in services.
Yeah.
So, but one thing I would say is it's vital for Hong Kong to really be part of RCEP, and especially in the first wave within the next 18 months. And I know the government is working very hard. I think we should all need to lobby for Hong Kong to be part of RCEP. and do everything we can, because Hong Kong can be the center of the RCEP whole region and really play a critical role, both to benefit RCEP and benefit ourselves.
There's so many other topics to be discussed, but given time, maybe also I want to also invite two professors to join our conversation. Dante?
Thank you, Dr. Feng, for your insightful sharing. We will now commence the first part of our question and answer session with our special guest today, followed by another part with the media and online audience. We are delighted to have with us two distinguished guests. Firstly, Professor Richard Wong, Philip Wong Kennedy Wong Professor at the University of Hong Kong. Professor Francis Lui, Professor Emeritus, Department of Economics at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Dr. Feng, Stephen, the stage is yours.
Great, thank you. Well, thanks so much, Professor Wong, Professor Lui, to join our conversation. And maybe I would just invite first Professor Lui to give your thoughts, given our the chat, and maybe ask. Feel free to join in and give comments and even ask questions and chat with Dr. Feng.
Well, it's very nice to listen to Victor for his insightful comments.
Sorry, Professor Lui, you have to. You need. Yeah.
It's really nice to listen to Victor for his insightful comments. I want to ask some questions, but I will ask the first one now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the global supply chain, of course, is intimately related to trade. Without trade, the scope of the supply chain will be much more limited. Okay? And many people have been saying that trade is good, partly because it makes countries dependent on each other. And that will make warfare much less likely. Okay? But on the other hand, well, we have already got all this trade and the globalization going on for several decades, and countries are really integrated together through trade. But then, for some reasons, some countries still fight against each other. Well, if these countries are separated, they're isolated, then this kind of fighting may be okay. I mean, but now they have been integrated, and then they fight against each other. That could disrupt the economies much more. And more recently, after the pandemic, we don't see that. Well, the United States is getting more friendly with China. I mean, well, it seems to be more fearful of China because of the success of China in controlling or in containing the pandemic. So this kind of fight may still go on. So what do you see the future? I mean, well, will the global supply chain be disrupted in such a way that the situation will be worse than having autarky? Okay. So what is your vision about this?
Okay. Should I?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Francis, thank you very much. We discuss these things a lot. Now, I think first of all, you're absolutely right. If you look at total trade, am I okay?
Yeah. I think Dr. Feng is okay.
Yeah.
We have
okay.
Yeah.
If you look at total trade, 80% of trade in the world is conducted through supply chains. In fact, I don't think one can be separated from the other. Supply chain is trade, trade is supply chain. Now, I am a firm believer that it's always better to be connected than to be insulated. You know better than anybody the idea of division of labor, the idea of really specialization, and then has to be making the pie bigger. Now, the division of the pie, of course, is another issue. And that revolves a lot about availability of jobs, et cetera. And frankly, the domestic political climates that are governing each country. So my perhaps the most important answer is, I have no doubt that connecting through global supply chain cannot do harm, can only do good. Whether you can use that and it would increase the size of the pie, whether that actually results in more conflict or less conflict, it depends on how the pie is divided. And we need to have different mechanisms to regulate that. Now, final comment is, I agree with you that unfortunately, I think the game has been played as a zero-sum game for the last 4 years. It's a very divisive zero-sum game where you win or I win, or there's only one winner. I don't think that's the true thing at all. We are now moving from into a multipolar world in which there are many players that are important, that matter. And we really need to move this into a non-zero-sum game. Now, does it mean that a non-zero-sum game have no competition and no conflict? Absolutely not. But there must be areas in which there also cooperation. So I would say the supply chains allow us to do that. And the most important area is probably in the area of climate change and sustainability. That, to me, is the one thing that unites the world. It unites the countries, rich and poor. It unites the rich and poor. Everybody don't want to be burned up with this climate change. So I think that's where we really need to say, while we have to hopefully set up the rules, good new rules to compete on areas, we must look for more and more areas and build on important things like climate change for cooperation. Yeah.
Professor Wong?
Thank you, Stephen. Victor, congratulations on a thoughtful, wide-ranging coverage of a whole range of very complex issues. And I share your optimism about our RCEP as being a important breakthrough and likely area that will drive future growth. I would like to comment on and maybe get your thoughts too on an issue that you mentioned, and that is financing. Right? Now, I'm reminded of the 2008 debacle, and after 2009, and in 2009, the G20 came back to supply liquidity and credit to jumpstart trade financing. Yes. Now, there are two lessons to be learned from that episode. First was the belief that relying on markets, particularly securities markets, through securitization as an alternative to the banking system, creating the shadow banking system was one of the problems that emerged. The shadow banking system was not regulated adequately, whereas the banking system was much more regulated, and you had arbitrage between the two, and that might have been the result of one of the failures. Now, one of the characteristics at that time was that the driving of market-driven capitalist markets, as opposed to banks being the regulated sector, was very much based on assets. Right? Mortgage-backed securities is most obvious, very much. Now, when you talk about trade financing in driving growth, economic transactions, we're talking about transactions. It's not asset-driven. And SMEs have always been poorly served by the big banks or the established banks. And again, in that area, breakthrough in market-driven, again, a neoliberal idea, but not based on assets, but based on transactions, is very crucial to promoting, and particularly in an area, let's say, just take for RCEP, where there are multiple currencies, unequal size economies, financial structures that are robust to not so robust, breaking through, particularly fintech, in this whole area, holds huge promise and may be crucial not only to strengthening RCEP's ability to thrive, but also be a trailblazer. And it's very important that you have a means to do that financing, evaluating credit risks and, on small businesses, the ability to do that, harnessing fintech for that purpose.
Yes.
And finally, based on a unit of accounting that is reliable, trustworthy, and not weaponized. I just wanted to your thoughts on that.
Okay, that last bit, not weaponized, maybe. Okay, Richard, I think these are very, very important ideas you put forward. And I think if we look at trade finance as really crucial to the next stage of the recovery of trade, Franz, what you're talking about, and really I think we need to solve this problem. And you put your finger on it. It's really, most of the financing to the SME sector has been done by banks. And banks have traditionally relied on assets. And it's really asset-based financing. If you are a SME, you don't have assets, you will have a hard time getting any sort of financing. And the key now about the way that we're now conceptualizing trade finance is no longer a financing based on assets, but it's based on transaction. And what you really do is develop a long history with data and so on, and use other means to actually secure the repayment of the loan. See, a very good example is if you look at trade financing, this pre-shipment, before you make the product, okay, that financing is one thing. But if you look at post-shipment, where the product is already there, and you're saying it, you're actually discounting the receivables of the buyers. And you're actually now taking the credit risk of the buyers, to help the SMEs. So that's one thing. But that's an example of why transaction banking is so important. But if you cut right to the chase, what you're really getting at is, if we think about the new technology using fintech, and that's really where finance and fintech and trade really comes intimately together, we can create an infrastructure in which we can trace data, collect data systematically. Importantly, we can actually trace the source of the data and the reliability of the data, and then use the data and the big data to make the credit risk. So if you're a small factory, but you've been in business for 20 years, and every time you ship, things have gone through, you've been very careful with the quality, et cetera, I can see it in the data. It's almost like doing insurance. You're based on large numbers, actuarial considerations. Once you collect that, but then you must have the system to collect. And the system is really built on the back of fintech. And really, and use of things like blockchains that would actually, see, everybody keeps saying you've got to collect a lot of data. One of the big issues on collecting data is definitely how you collect it and the cost, et cetera. But a big issue is the data reliable. Where did the data come from? You don't keep on throwing bad data with the good data and trying to say there's no problem. So that's very important. So if you zoom away from that detail, what you're really doing now with trade finance is linking the trade sector with the finance sector. If Hong Kong has a very big financial center, we cannot just rely on, although we're doing extremely well, just trading securities and so on. We've got to link the financial sector to the real economy. And the real linkage is through trade finance, in my mind, or the most practical way to link it, and trade. And that way, we're actually then taking our major advantage of the financial center and our big advantage of being a global orchestrated supply chain, merging it. And I don't think there are many places in the world that could rival that.
So this is also an opportunity for Hong Kong, since today the topic is implications for Hong Kong. So trade finance.
I know you're going to ask me that.
so trade finance, fintech, that sort of things are potentially also opportunities for Hong Kong. But Victor, from your sort of experiences though around the world, can you comment on sort of our, where we are in Hong Kong, in terms of these sort of innovations. Are we there yet? Do we have potential? And what sort of challenges that we need to overcome to get there?
I think we've done a lot in recent years. I think the government has taken the lead, but we're not leading the field.
Okay.
I think there are areas, including places like Singapore, that are ahead of us. Now, having said that, this is still in the early days. So it's almost like,
a marathon.
Yeah, no, not a marathon, but at least you're racing around the track, 跑馬.
Right. Okay.
You just
right.
at the first turn.
Okay.
No, you may, so plenty. And I think what is happening in terms of the revival of trade globally, our traditional position in the orchestration of global supply chains, and now our very strong performance in the securities trading, IPO, etc. And I think there is opening up this window where we can put the linkage as trade finance and link the whole thing together. And that will be the momentum to really drive our fintech sector.
Okay.
To no end. In fact, at the end of the day, it's all about the application, development application of, I think, blockchains mostly. And I think that's really where this is going to, what Richard was saying was absolutely right on.
Okay.
And we, I think, have the opportunity to really be a world leader in I think, transaction banking, what you were talking about. The idea of doing banking based on transactions and having all the available information. And then, as you were saying earlier when we talked, China itself is moving from made in China to made by China. It's going to be a lot of outreach to other geographic areas, made by China. That conduit and the underlying infrastructure that we will be building with, let's say, the world's Center for Trade Finance, I think that will join our two major strengths together, I think could be very important.
Interesting. Maybe we have another round of comments and feedback from Professor Lui.
Yeah, okay. Both Victor and Richard believe that the RCEP is very important, and I agree with both of you. Now, to some extent, I believe that the RCEP should be regarded as part of the BRI. It's actually a big chunk of it, okay? But just by looking at the number of countries involved. And I also anticipate that in the future, countries along the BRI could have a higher long-term economic growth rate than all these Western countries or all these traditional countries, provided that the BRI countries can engage themselves in international trade. So they should join the globalization process. And in recent years, we have already seen that. Say, take the example of some African countries. Their business model in production have been improving quickly. And the kind of business models that they've been using, well, are actually the grandchildren of the Hong Kong model. Okay? Now, the Hong Kong business people went to the Pearl River Delta 30 or 40 years ago to create all these labor-intensive factories. And just say 6 or 7 years ago or so, well, China invited many of these African entrepreneurs to go to visit the Pearl River Delta or the Greater Bay Area, and then they sent teams there and learn the kind of model. And then they have imported these models, which were actually created by Hong Kong. So Hong Kong could be regarded as really the ancestors of the modern African
revival.
So, well, say in this sense, Hong Kong has all these past glories. So Hong Kong contributed a lot, not only to China but to the world. But now, Hong Kong seems to be stopped doing that. but geographically, Hong Kong is located still in a very prime area. So in the future, what kind of role can Hong Kong play to facilitate all this initiative for the Belt and Road and of course for RCEP?
Yeah, Francis, very well said. Now let me respond in two ways. The first way is absolutely right. If you look back to the last 40 years, what Hong Kong has done is that we created the global supply chain, that first model. And out of joining Hong Kong's international reach and our financial capability, together with the competitiveness of manufacturing in the Pearl River Delta. Now, back in those days, what do you mean by competitive manufacturing? Is low-cost land, low-cost labor. What you're saying is that model obviously has completely sunsetted. Now, in today's context, though, what we're really seeing now is a new partnership, I think, between Hong Kong and the Greater Bay, at the other side of the Greater Bay Area, especially between us and Shenzhen, that is possible, which is the whole world has moved on now to digital manufacturing, manufacturing 4.0, the use of AI, IoT, et cetera, okay? Now, where is the best place in the world for doing manufacturing 4.0? Able to do the 0 to 1, 1 to 100, scaling up, et cetera, and then doing the large volumes of producing millions. It is actually in the GBA. So what we really need to do today is continue to use our global reach, and especially our very strong financial center, talking about trade finance again, to meld with the new competitive manufacturing 4.0 in the Greater Bay Area to create the new globalized supply chain. That will be the next generation of digital global supply chains that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk. We have all the experience and the background to do this. You may have the technology, but I've got the customers, you know? And I've got the knowledge of what we call verticals of different industries, okay? So I think that's my first answer. I think there's a huge opportunity now for us to form this new partnership with the GBA, where we recreate the next generation of global supply chains, digitalized supply chains for the world. Now, the other thing is about physical flows. That I do agree. Hong Kong, while we orchestrate a lot of trade, which is offshore, right? The physical flow to Hong Kong is really now decreasing. And that's important because we need jobs, we need the flow. What is there, I think, is if you look at Hong Kong's position, we are in the middle of an hourglass between you know, the northern part of Asia, which is China, Korea, Japan, and the southern part of Asia, which is ASEAN, in fact, India, and the Australia, New Zealand. So we're in the neck of the hourglass, and we will intermediate all the north-south flows. So I think what we have recently announced in the CE's policy address of making a focus on the Hong Kong International Airport is absolutely correct. And you know why? Because look, let's be fair. You know, Hong Kong is still the world's, and will continue, by the way, to be the world's largest international cargo hub, doing more than 5 million tons a year. Despite everybody trying to do everything, we're still number one. Unfortunately, in the sea cargo side, I think we're now number 8, and maybe even losing market share, you know, to Yantian and people like that, and Nansha, the new risers. So what we really need to do is to maintain our leadership position in the international cargo side and start developing the newer forms of logistics, what we call intermodal. You know, linking air, land, and sea in terms of intermodal logistics and grafting that onto the advantage of our air, okay? And then moving things. And that actually will be the basis for us to retain the physical flows through Hong Kong. And I think that is going to be absolutely crucial for the German. You know, years ago, I was chairman of the airport for 10 years. I'm now seeing a lot of that vision being realized. And I'm really very happy about that. It's important that we do that. And I don't think, by the way, it's easy to take Hong Kong's position as the world's #1 air because of our location, because of our air rights, because of our linkage. And the move to Zhuhai is absolutely correct, where we get a domestic network to link with a global network. And also the idea of having the right legal system and the right rules to clear things very quickly. And it's an element of trust in the reliability of the system. That's why Hong Kong is #1 in air trade.
Before we take questions from the media and audiences, can I get a quick last quick thought from Professor Wong?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. One of looking back, one of the great achievements of the digital technology and the hyper-globalization that took place after the 1990s was actually we discovered the creation of global supply chains. And as a result of that, it just happened that many of the economies that were willing to step forward to liberalize and deregulate so that they became hubs of manufacturing, right? Production factories rose during the 90s. Very few countries actually were able to step up. One of them was obviously China. As a result of that, once that situation was created, it became the initial condition for future economic global supply chains, how it would reconfigure.
Yes.
Because it became regionalized. Because production tend to be quite regional. Germany, Poland is an area, or parts of Eastern Europe is an area. North America is obviously one, and RCEP region is obviously one of the key ones. It requires quite a bit of public goods to be provided in each block area. That means, just like as OPEC relied on Saudi Arabia, willing to keep the thing. So, what is your assessment of the key factors that are essential for keeping this RCEP region vibrant, attractive to other people to come in addition to all the things that you've been talking about, for it to actually become eventually a role model, a block that would harness, not just because it is 1/3 of the world's population, 1/3 of the GDP, it needs to provide this public good, and what are the key factors? Who should be the provider? Could you share with us your thoughts?
Okay. That's Richard, that's a very deep question. I think we can have another seminar just on that. Okay, I think that's crucial, but I can answer it very straightforward. The development of these models, and in fact economic development, is a coordination between the use of both labor and brain power, coordinated with the development of infrastructure. One of the big things in my mind that have allowed us to work with the Pearl River Delta is because we had the connectivity, Hong Kong and the Pearl River Delta. And then when the rest of China developed, China did not have the infrastructure in those days. That's why the movement from the Pearl River Delta was up the coast to the Yangtze River Delta and so on. And all the development was actually on the coast where the infrastructure existed. But so the key there is the mobility of labor at that point, to take the labor to the coast. Now there's no more, right? The infrastructure is the whole country. I'm using that to illustrate. And I've always felt that India might have a bit of difficulty. And it's got a lot of labor, very good labor. But there's no, there's no infrastructure to assess it. That's why it has really not developed a very large export economy. And at the same time, the labor is not mobile. So that is really, I'm just illustrating that. Now, if you now fast forward to today, RCEP, what has happened, and going back to Francis, your BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, all the infrastructure that has been built since the beginning of the Belt and Road is now coming into play. We have completely built the infrastructure for what is going to happen now to RCEP. The key parts of it, right? I remember people used to ask a lot of questions. Why are you building all these ports? Why are you building all these bridges? They're bridges to nowhere. Who's going to use it? Now they have the answer. It is really that swarm of SMEs and this development of this new model and the geographic spread that could not take place but for the fact that the infrastructure has been put in place in the initial stages of the Belt and Road development. Now it's going to be paid back, and pay back very handsomely. So it's so it's always the timing between the development and also the infrastructure. And in the world in which the clock speed is becoming more and more rapid, that is going to be a bigger and bigger advantage. And that will be what you were talking about, make this the demonstration model for the world.
Thank you, Dr. Fong. Thanks so much, Professor Wong, Professor Lui. Danting.
Thank you, Dr. Fong, Professor Wong, and Professor Lui for sharing your insights, especially in highlighting the importance of global supply chain normalization in hastening the recovery in employment and inclusive growth, and the pivotal role of Hong Kong in orchestrating the trade and growth of both China and Asia. We will now move on to the last question and answer session. Today, the webinar is live on SCMP and a number of online media. Dr. Fong will be taking questions from the media and online audience. Stephen, please.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Fong. Our last part of the session, first question is from RTHK, English News. How important is it for Hong Kong to join RCEP? And if so, would that significantly help the SAR rebound from economic downturn? Anything the SAR government itself should and can do to help Hong Kong businesses ride the tide in the wake of the pandemic and Sino-US trade relationships? The second part is a bit general, but...
Okay. I think that's a very good question. I think it is absolutely necessary for Hong Kong to be an integral part of RCEP. And I would say the sooner the better. And I certainly hope we will be in the first wave of new entrants in the next 18 months. Now, the Hong Kong government and a lot of people in the private sector have actually been working with RCEP for almost the last 10 years. We have been there at the initial discussion and founding of RCEP. So I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be the initial members. And we can join RCEP as an economy because we are a separate customs territory. And that's why the units are similar to APEC, where the economies are units and not necessarily national sovereign entities. So we have the full support of the central government to do this. Now, I'd like to point out several very important factors. Hong Kong already has a free trade agreement, FTA, with ASEAN. It already have free trade agreements with Australia and New Zealand, which is the good work that our government has done in the last decades. So we actually have already bilateral agreements with all the members of RCEP, except for Japan and Korea. So I'm sure we're working on that as well. So it's so easy to, in a sense, take these bilateral agreements and put it into one framework, which is RCEP. Now, so I think that is a very important concept. And I think it's essential for us to be part of RCEP, for us to really be able to fully leverage our capabilities, on a regional and global basis. The final thing I would say is that we would also play, hopefully, a very important role in all the parallel organizations that go with these regional trade groupings. For example, in APEC, there is something called ABAC, A-B-A-C, APEC Business Advisory Council, which is the business counterpart of that. And then there are also NGO counterparts, and we really should be very active in those parallel organizations and really make a difference and really have Hong Kong influence and Hong Kong energy, be applied to that area.
And the second part is anything else what is a bit general the SAR government should or can do to help the Hong Kong businesses in the pandemic and the US, but that's sort of obviously the
well,
trade
I think getting into RCEP certainly is, I would say, a top priority. I would say helping with the facilitation of trade finance at this critical time, I think is crucial.
Okay.
And I think our Export Credit Insurance Corporation, ECIC, is absolutely doing a great job and working on it. But I think I'm hoping that they would actually increase their commitments to the export credit insurance available.
Right, so which is sort of linked to our second question from an audience, saying that tapping into the government subsidies to support export credit guarantees and to increase the multiplier effect is a brilliant idea. The question then is, why the government appear to be elusive to implement. So what you're saying is that they are doing it.
Yeah, I'm not sure they're elusive to. I think there are a lot of competing needs,
right?
And I think they're balancing those. I think they are very focused on the recovery of the economy because I think that's fundamental.
Right.
You can do all the other things. If the economy doesn't recover, I think you still falter in the longer term. But of course, everybody knows that the first order priority is to make sure we control COVID-19.
Yes.
Right. That is without doubt. Without that.
Yeah. And there are a couple questions, Dr. Fong, basically asking that what is the competitive advantage of Hong Kong? People are obviously losing confidence that Hong Kong, can we still compete in these sort of emerging changes in supply chain? Do we still have the competitiveness in the supply chain specialization that you mentioned? And even in logistics, some people felt that mainland economy is developing very fast, and so can we still be the sourcing hub and the hub of everything?
Well, I think not only can we be, but we would take the leadership position in that. I think we have the wherewithal to really actually take a leadership position, as we have done. As Francis has said earlier, we were the creator of the original global supply chains. And that model drove the Pearl River Delta, frankly, drove the country and drove the region and the world. I think that model. This model has now gone into the manufacturing 4.0 stage, right? And I think we have all the a background to actually now have a new partnership with the Pearl River Delta, the GBA, and actually take that new manufacturing competitiveness global. And what we have developed in the meantime is really the most important financial hub in this time zone, okay? And if we can marry that together with our opportunity to recreate the next generation of supply chains, I think we have a huge opportunity in front of us. And the amount of jobs that could create for young people and so on, I mentioned the fintech opportunities that would actually infuse in the whole redevelopment of the supply chain is huge.
Can I? Yeah. The optimism of this is based on our talents, or based on the international exposure, or based on the sort of the R&Ds that we have, or obviously of being a financial hub. Can you sort of elaborate on this sort of optimism of why Hong Kong can continue to lead?
I think we have our established position in the global supply chain world.
Okay.
We have our customer base, both in the developed countries and now developing very rapidly within the mainland. I think that there will be this idea of the merging of the export sector and the manufacturing sector and the domestic sales manufacturing sector will allow Hong Kong companies immediately a major opportunity to sell into the domestic Chinese market. And be part of the Chinese consumers' growth. So all these are very tangible assets. And then, of course, I think our external orientation and our knowledge of global trade and arbitration and all the things that, and I think it's irreplaceable. One thing I would say though is what we may need to regain, which maybe unfortunately we have not focused on as much in the last 20 years, is an outward orientation. We are an outward-looking society, and we are an outward-looking economy. And unfortunately, I think in the last 20 years, for circumstances that we all know, we might have turned inward. I think if there's anything to be done, it's all in front of us. Anything that we need to do to regain that stature, that competitiveness, is really our attitude to really look outward. So we really got to look outward to the mainland, of course, but also to ASEAN, to the rest of the region, to RCEP, and to the world.
Interesting. And being a think tank, so I think it's fitting to ask the last questions about your thoughts on how best can the government help Hong Kong companies can fully seize the opportunities arising from the dual circulation and RCEP that we talked about. What?
Well, I have to just remunerate what I have just said. But I think one thing I would say, I think having the government make our own people understand really the significance of the position that we have. We're not down. We are actually well positioned. And I think we need to understand why we're well positioned. And given all the things that's happening, now we do have internal issues, of course. I'm not going to take that away. And for a minute, and we also need to deal with the COVID situation head on. But once we do that, I think there is so much ahead of us. So we need to not just look at our own internal circulation, but we have a huge external circulation which gives us the advantage. We hook the two together. And so we need to look outward again and take advantage of our external economy. Hong Kong has always been, historically, an outward-looking society and an outward-looking economy. And we need to really return our mental attitude and thinking to that state. And if the government could help in that regard, I think it's more valuable, frankly, than tangible, handouts and so on. I think we need to have, I think, the opportunity to actually change our attitude, think for ourselves, and actually look after ourselves and really create the new future.
Thanks so much, Dr. Fung, for your insightful and inspiring comments today. Thanks so much, Dante.
Thank you, Dr. Fung. And this concludes today's live webinar. Once again, thank you to Dr. Fung, Professor Wong, and Professor Lui for your valuable insights. Our next Insight Forum session is scheduled for 12th of January, 2021. Professor Sin Kang Chang, Emeritus President and Professor of City University of Hong Kong, will talk on the topic of Clash of Civilizations, Historical Perspectives and Future Way Out. Please note the forum will be conducted in Putonghua. Please stay tuned for more details on our Hong Kong Foundation's main Facebook page and the Public Policy Institute's Facebook page. It has been a pleasure speaking in front of you today. Thank you all for coming. Stay healthy and have a great day.